It says we're live. Now, this is a little bit of a darker me. Oh no, I get a bit brighter if I get a bit closer to the camera. Let's do that. Good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you're watching this from. This is part 2 of the Forgiveness Hangout Week, whatever you want to call it, with Tyler Thurman and me, Julian Freeman of thestarsofwellbeing.com. So what did we do on Monday, Tyler?
We just had a lovely chat about sort of the nature of forgiveness, and for me, is kind of at least how I'm thinking about it is how it relates to these fields of the 3 principles and innate health and the inside-out understanding, how it kind of gives us a different understanding of forgiveness than is maybe the traditional worldview of forgiveness, and in my experience, a much more helpful one. so that's nice.
I loved your point on Monday about that when you see that we're part of something bigger and we can't possibly be hurt, then why do you even need to? Forgiveness is like a defense mechanism kind of thing. So why do you need that? Because you can never be hurt. That blew me away.
Yeah, and it's in some ways I want to just say that can be a big ask if you're right in the middle of struggling with resentment and forgiving somebody for something that you think was bad or wrong or horrible. And so I would just want to say I understand that. Like that's hard to see in the midst of struggling with something, some really a thought storm is kind of how I talk about it. If you're struggling with that and you can't see that, wow, there's more to this, just that's okay. Maybe take a fresh look at this conversation from a calmer place, a more peaceful place, because it'll come. But that, I'm glad that you brought that up, because for me that really is it's everything about forgiveness. Like if you don't recognize some aspect of us being part of a bigger whole, part of a bigger mind, if you want to use that language, spiritual beings having a human experience, whatever it is, then forgiveness is going to be a struggle. And if you, to the extent you can see that, and I'll just out myself, sometimes I can see it, sometimes I can't. To the extent you can see that in the moment or after the fact, it's going to be much, much easier to forgive. In fact, it won't occur to you as a process. It'll occur to you as a natural unfolding. Like, oh, I just find myself feeling more compassion for that person that did this thing to me, or I feel myself being more at peace even though this happened to me. You'll just kind of find yourself letting go much easier, and you won't have to worry about, okay, I must forgive. And then, of course, we've all had the experience of that not working. And so it really is, for me, about a deeper truth, like you said.
But that wasn't, until you mentioned it on Monday, I've not seen that way at all. Interestingly. And the way I'd seen it was, I think I described it on Monday, was that when you're in that a position where you can see the innocence of a situation, the moment you can see the innocence of it, you kind of go, oh, okay, so they didn't really mean it like I thought they meant it.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing starts to change. And then, of course, there's always the other one, I suppose, which I was just thinking about as you mentioned it, which is you have another thought. Something comes along that changes your world in another way, and all of a sudden, the need to forgive gone. You know, it's not
Yeah.
relevant. It's not relevant anymore.
It's that saying that we use in the in this field sometimes. We have the infinite potential for new thought in any moment. Um, Now, in fairness, it could be new shitty thought, but it could also be new peaceful thought, new, clear thought, new compassionate thought, new, whatever it is. Like that, there will be a feeling associated with it, but it certainly could be a much different experience than you're currently in. Just in the next moment, like that's it. If you just know that that's available from an experiential standpoint, from a thought standpoint, then that makes a big difference because it gives hope. I think it's like hope for something different to come in.
And well, one of the basics for me is, you were talking about being in a thought storm and how you wouldn't necessarily see that you're part of a bigger mind in a thought storm. And exactly the same thing would apply if, in my instance, of you're hardly likely to see it's an innocent mistake, or even the potential for innocence in a situation if you're in a thought storm. If your consciousness is low. I mean, before this call, you were talking about you called me out for talking about something that was a judgmental way of looking at a situation, and which was quite right. And when you're in that judgmental place, then actually you are in a low quality of mind. You aren't seeing it with the clarity and the peace and the bigger view that you. So in all of those places, the chances of you being in a place to have the insight, the particularly new thought that you need, is quite low. But the thing that I've learned out of all of this is that when you go into a low quality mind, there's an insight coming. Because once you let go, and you will let go, and maybe that's, we were talking about how-tos, weren't we? But
That's right.
This is the closest you get to a how-to with the principles. Is like when you finally let go of that thinking, let the thought storm pass through, then you've got a beautiful space for some insight to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's it really just is just to say the saying, a deeper understanding. And I think this is, you mentioned a couple things that I think are really important that really point towards self-forgiveness, because I think we touched on it last time, but we didn't spend maybe a lot of time, which is when you begin to see, God, everybody gets caught up in thought. Everybody does stupid stuff when they're in a low state of mind. Maybe when you have a deeper understanding, you don't act on those thoughts quite as much, but you still do sometimes. And you say things you wish you hadn't, and you begin to see, wow, everyone struggles with that. And it's not just me that's a jackass, and everyone else is, a really nice person. Because a lot of people I know, that's what they struggle with the most is self-resentment. And so like, oh man, I was judgmental. Oh man, I said that thing and that was mean and I'm a horrible person because of it. Well, if you begin to understand more about these principles and like you said, the nature of thought storms, they just pass and there's this deeper well-being kind of underneath that we can't see all the time, then we're much more willing to kind of give ourselves a break. Like, hey, yeah, you're part of the human condition too. It's not everyone else, the three principles, that's how it works for them. But for me, I'm just hardwired as or more.
Are you back, Tyler?
Oh yeah, I must have cut off for a second there. Sorry about that.
Go on, just repeat what you said.
I was just talking about how that deeper understanding of how it all works, that deeper truth, it allows us to let ourselves off the hook more and more of the time, and to forgive ourselves, because it's just the more you understand about kind of how resentment works and what it does to us, it doesn't have an impact on our deeper nature, but it does have an impact on our body, and it does have an impact on our experience in the moment. You can see, wow, it's really, it's not helping me out here, whether I'm resentful towards myself or anybody else. And so it's really helpful to be able to give yourself a break. Be at peace about things that you've done, because we've all done stuff we wish we hadn't. But then that takes us back to the beauty of, well, we can't really do anything to people's spiritual nature anyways, so you're off the hook.
Except that, as you were saying that, I've seen it a few places recently, but the word self-loathing seems to come up quite a lot. So when you talk about forgiveness, self-forgiveness, to me, that's the letting yourself off the hook. There are so many reasons why we judge ourselves and find ourselves wanting, maybe on a daily basis. And to be able to do that less seems big to me.
Yeah, it is. And I think the other thing that when you talk about self-loathing and self-forgiveness, it's worth asking the question, well, which self am I referring to? Because there's an aspect of what I talk about as our personality, right, or the ego, but it's just thought, right? It's just a particular way of thinking that we have about ourselves. And if you also kind of know that everyone's got that self, we've got a personality, we've got an ego, thought system, and if you kind of know they're all neurotic and they're all judgmental and they're all kind of miserable, then that's helpful too. It's helpful in the sense that everyone's got one, but it's also helpful to know that that's not our true self. Like there's something about our true nature, our essential nature of mind, that it doesn't need forgiving. It doesn't need to be let off the hook, because it always is. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's something that kind of pops up.
No, that's a great point that I'd like to bring in one of the bits of feedback that we had this week. And let me just say to the people that did give us some feedback, thank you so much for doing that. Because actually, I've really got something out of it. Let's say you guys have been the teachers, which is lovely, and so I've really enjoyed this format, and we're going to do some more of it. But back to the first bit of feedback, I'm going to call him M, but he wrote in and said that he used this word, right, in his feedback. He said, "I become disarmed." And I wrote back to him and said, "Ooh, what do you mean by this?" The word disarmed jumped out at me. And I wrote back to him and said, "What do you think disarmed means?" And he came back with a beautiful reply that when we forgive, we let go. We don't need the armor anymore. We don't need a coping strategy or no plan B. When we let go and forgive, we're no longer prisoners of our own thought storms, of what they said or did to us, etc. and we are free.
Hmm.
So then, by not letting go, we can only hurt ourselves. And he says, the real question is it worth it? He's like, let go, disarm. Freedom is waiting for everybody. And I loved that. It reminded me of, sometimes I get into these situations and it's like you're both there, armed and dangerous. And what you need to do is just to put the weapons down. And just seeing that you don't need to be armed and dangerous. You don't need to be ready. You called it on Monday. It's a defensive strategy, etc. But also it's about being prepared to be the first one. Because sometimes you're both staring each other down, or maybe let's make this less personal. I mean, you said the situation is neutral, always neutral, and yet you in your thought storm see it as not neutral.
Right.
That's my natural tendency anyway. And the moment you can put your weapon down, then you see that they were never carrying a weapon in the first place.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And there's almost like a. Do you remember, you're probably too young to remember David Carradine in Kung Fu, but
Oh no, I remember at least the reruns.
all right, okay. But he had a thing where he was tested all the time, and one of the tests that was in every episode would be that he would come up against some guys with 6-shooters and all the rest of it, and of course he was unarmed.
Right.
But of course, because he had the power of kung fu, or the knowledge that at any time he had the ability to defend himself if he needed to, and of course he always tried vehemently not to use force, but was always forced to do. Anyway, that was the formula of the show. But
Right.
it's that you don't need the weaponry. You never need the weaponry.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful and when you don't carry that weaponry, when you don't rely on being the fastest gun in the West, then you really show up. You really are. You can just be you because you're enough to disarm the whole situation. So maybe this is me taking what Em said and kind of replaying we're part of something bigger, you never need to worry about it. But it's like, and the reason why I mentioned this right here is because you were talking about which self are we talking about. And I suppose the self I'm talking about is you don't need to carry the 6-shooter, you don't need to be the gunslinger. That's not you.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy a lot. It brings to mind the saying. I think I first heard this with American football, which is the best defense is a good offense, which is a lot of it's how what's going on behind the scenes a lot for people, which is if someone appears to be attacking you, the only reason they would ever do that is because they're trying to defend themselves. They feel vulnerable themselves. They feel like they're at risk, and so they're attacking. Right?
Can I just interrupt there? I've got
Absolutely.
My story on Monday about Mr. Angry. Do you remember us
I
talking
do.
about a guy who was very angry at a moment's notice? And I went back the next day. It's been a beautiful week this year in North Yorkshire. Now, it didn't get anywhere near your temperatures in New Mexico, I'm sure. But I was taking the bike out a lot this week, so I went to this place a lot, and I noticed the next day after I spoke to you that this guy was like hiding. He's got 2 little places he works, and the moment he noticed I was there, he like stayed inside, and I could see him looking out the window at me as if to say, I'm not going out there until he goes. And I'm like, oh my God, what kind of thinking is it that he doesn't even want to walk from one workshop to the other? He won't have to look at me. He won't have to engage with me. I won't pay. I might say hi, but he doesn't have to recognize. Doesn't have to do. What is it that makes him stop what he's doing and wait for me to leave?
Yeah.
And then I'm going, oh, so that just says to me that there's some thinking going on for this guy, and I can be really compassionate about that now. I can go,
Yeah.
oh no, now I've still got some thinking about. I'd rather not, face up with his anger because he always draws his gun, right? I might
Sure.
not have, I might not be wearing mine much, but he's always got his gun ready,
Well, I think that actually brings up a really good a distinction I think we might have touched on Monday, but that I think is really important with forgiveness, because we think when we begin to see more about the truth of this, that wow, there is some element of me, some essential part of me that is invulnerable. We we then I think sometimes mistakenly think that we should then go put ourselves in the most sort of physically dangerous situations that we can, because all's forgiven anyways. Nothing's really going to happen to me. But my experience is a little bit different. That we just are more at peace, and consequently we kind of are more in touch with a wisdom that's behind the scenes, that that tends to actually keep us more physically safe than maybe we otherwise would be, which I think is interesting. So it's not that you go throw yourself in the fray necessarily, although you might go do some things that you were previously afraid to do, which from a sort of psychological perspective. But I think that's an important distinction, because it's very easy to be like, oh, now I have to go be best friends with this person that, like you said, he's angry all the time. Well, that's not going to be very fun to hang out with that person, probably. So, you don't have to go befriend everybody, because it's beginning to see it's not really to do with them. I'm resentful because I'm in resentful thinking, because I had thinking about that person, about what they should have been doing, and what they ended up doing wasn't the right thing for them to do, and I need to right the wrong and change their behavior. And it's that's a whole other that's a whole other thought storm to get involved in. It's just you begin to see, wow, you know what? They're caught up in thought. I don't need to hang out with them. I don't need to go be their best friend, but I know that they're doing the best they know how to do based on their level of understanding and whatever thoughts they have going through their head in the moment. And I'm doing the best I know how to do, given the thoughts I have going through my head and the feelings going through my body. And there's that's, I think, where the innocence comes in. It's like, oh yeah, we really are doing the best. It's just the form that takes for some people who have just some really, you might say, dark thinking or really insecure thinking. The form that their actions take can appear to be pretty horrible, right? And so that's why it seems like, oh, that's, there's something different about that person. But it's just, the only thing different is their thinking. It's just, our thinking can take any form, and it can take some pretty nasty forms. So I'm not saying that it can't, and that people don't hurt other people's bodies. But as far as, that deeper nature is concerned, yeah, there is something invulnerable. So I'm stepping off of pulpit.
No, that's fine. So I love the sense of, when I don't have to carry the gun, then I'm much freer. Then I don't have to live up to anything, And I think in a lot of those Carradine episodes, the guy with the gun really didn't want to do
Yeah.
what he was suggesting that, fight. He really didn't want to fight, and Carradine knew it.
Sure.
But that actually brings me on to one of the next bits of feedback that we had, where G was saying that before, and thank you very much for this, that before his forgiveness had a kind of religious flavour to it, before the principles, his understanding of the principles, and it seemed to be associated with the idea of everybody being a sinner, and so you needed to do something in order to either recover from whatever that transgression. So there's a whole kind of mindset around what you're allowed to, how you're allowed to show up. So maybe this isn't the gunslinger. Maybe this is, or maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe you're allowed to use the weapon as long as you go through a process afterwards of remorse and various other self-loathing. I think we just call it. That allows you to suddenly go, right. Well, I've been through the due process. I'm out the other side, so I'm okay now. I should be okay now.
Yeah.
But then you have to go through a whole process. People there are feeling like there's stuff to do in order to forgive.
Right.
And that I bind. And then he says, once he came across the three principles, he's got a different way of thinking. And I love this. It's like he could go to a situation and then see that if he put himself in the same situation, exactly the same situation, he might well end up acting in exactly the same way. In which case, he could see how what they're doing is understandable, and then all of a sudden, it starts to dissolve. He has the insight, he says, it puts me in a whole different light on being affected by the actions of others. He's like, I'm not certain this is true, but I like the idea of it's true. So it's almost like if I thought about it that way, then I can see the insight, and it's okay. It's gone.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lovely. It's almost like I don't actually have to have that situation in order to see the possibility.
Right. That kind of brings up for me an analogy. Well, first of all, the phrase that comes to mind is, well, that's the old put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? But I would take it just one step further, which is to say, I don't think we can really do this, but we can understand it, which is if we put ourselves in their situation, which includes whatever thinking they had going on, thinking and feeling, right? Because they go together. If we had been in their situation with the same thinking and feeling, you can, bet your bottom dollar that you'd probably act similarly, because I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but our thinking and our feeling, that pretty much drives our behavior. It's I think I heard Michael Neal say one time, you could pretty much boil down everything to, well, it made sense to me at the time. Even when you're in a really tumultuous thought storm, things make sense to you that won't make sense to you when that storm has settled down. It's like, oh yeah, it makes sense on some level for me to lash out at this person. It makes sense on some level for me to, because in my estimation, we've just forgotten who we are. We think, wow, I am under attack, and I'm capable of being attacked. It's the gunslinger. It's like, well, if you're up against a gunslinger and you're just a body, well, you might want to run for cover because our bodies are vulnerable to bullets. It's just true. But if you're up against a a word slinger, and you know that, well, my spirit's not vulnerable to word slinging. um, that's a deeper level of understanding. Well, hey, there's something about me invulnerable to this. I might, you know, get caught up in my thinking about what they're doing in the moment, but if you kind of know, even in the background, you know, this is not really going to affect me on any meaningful level, um, then you're going to be okay. You're going to be more willing to feel compassion for that person, feel maybe even love. And from there, you're also going to do the actions that it occurs to you to do, which might be remove yourself from the situation. It might be engage with the person more, see if you can have a different kind of a conversation with that person. It might be something totally different, but it's just seeing that, wow, I've just forgotten who I am. That's the only reason we're resentful towards other people, as far as I can tell, is, wow, I've just lost touch with that for the moment. And that's okay, because it's going to happen.
What I love about both of those things, though, both M and G mention it. I mean, G then talks about the fact that you you know you don't even have to take off the weapon. The thoughts just start dissolving. They just go away. They just become not relevant anymore. Once you can start to either have the insight, whichever way you have it, about the situation not being quite the way you're feeling or have been feeling about it, then you don't even need. It's like, so before, where I was saying both of you come to the party armed and dangerous, then what I'm saying is I'm almost implying that you have to put the gun down, and the answer is the gun just slips off the belt just slips off your waist. You don't put your hands to the buckle at all.
And I think maybe even another way to, because I like the analogy, because it does feel like that sometimes, right? I'm in a gunfight with this person, even though it's verbal. It is seeing maybe like it's a toy gun, right? It can't, it's a weapon. It's not a real weapon, right? Because we only think of weapons as something that can do damage.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. I do like that analogy though.
So those two great pieces of feedback, which I really loved, and I love the fact that both of them kind of talk about. I mean, in M's case, it was about I don't need to carry around the armor anymore, and that's not carrying that weight is freedom in itself, and the freedom it gives you. And if you have to wear the gun all the time, then again, that's very limiting. That's very restricting in terms of who you are and how that shows up. And so the freedom, when the gun belt dissolves in front of your eyes, the freedom G talks about, not having the angst and about situations and going back to that. Being a sinner or that kind of mindset just disappears because it's not relevant anymore, and that's a huge change. And I think that's really, you were talking, I don't know if it was just before this hangout, but or on it, about as we get a deeper understanding of the principles. And to me, when you shed some of those layers of thinking and they don't come back, or when they do come back, you kind of can see them for what they are, rather than believing that you are a gunslinger. You need to go into, high noon, and
Yeah.
then life becomes a whole much more natural, much more simpler, much more peaceful, much more free. What other words do you want to use? A better experience for me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that just kind of popped in my head was you spoke a little earlier about getting caught up in judgment, and it strikes me that all thoughts really are judgment. Like that's how it works. And you just mentioned, well, we're seeing it more for what it is, and it can kind of go both ways, right? We can kind of use thought. It's not really using thought. We can have thought that is judging a situation or a person falsely, or we can be judging them accurately. Um, and like as long as we begin, that's really just seeing more of how things work, right? It's seeing more of the principles at work behind, everybody's operations, and um, I think that's really one of the keys to it all. Is um, you don't have to stop judging. It's just it's helpful to have a more accurate representation of the truth, and know that what because thought is so illusory. I'm just gonna see it inaccurately sometimes. I'm just gonna judge a situation, and it's gonna be wrong. And for me, I have one of the, I think, most valuable things that I've learned for myself is that I'm just wrong about stuff plenty. I just, I know that I don't know, and sometimes that's enough. You don't have to, because a lot of people, they ask me, if it's like one-on-one coaching, um, like, how can I see this differently? Well, you don't even really need to try to see it differently or more truthfully. You just kind of need to know that you're probably wrong. If you're caught up in upset and stress and misery and resentment, you're just probably wrong about the truth of it. And that's a great thing. It's a great thing that we can be wrong. And it's just kind of helpful to know that that's going to happen because we're human beings, and we're going to get upset at other people, and that's okay.
I do that. I suppose I see that slightly. I agree. I see that slightly differently. My slight difference to that is that um, as I get a better understanding of the understanding, I I I catch myself like, oh look, I'm buckling on the gun,
Yeah.
and then I stop, and then I unbuckle it if I'm lucky. Or I might go on and go, what the hell, I'm just gonna wear it because I think it needs to be worn right now. And then you're into that. At some point, you then see it and you go, well, what am I doing? I
Yeah.
don't need this thing, this anger, this whatever this feeling is, because I think the gun is really just, it's either words as you call it, or it's feelings. It's kind of, I feel like this guy, I need to do this.
Right.
I deserves that, and it's all judgmental. You're right. You're absolutely right. But the ability to kind of see that and then go, oh, you're in that place again. Put it down, because it's going to be easier and it's going to be better for you if you don't.
Yeah. I think I first heard this from Bill Pettit, but he talks about, well, people ask him, well, what do I do when I'm really upset? And he says, well, you basically you shut your mouth and you put your you put your hands under your butt and you wait. And that's, I think, maybe a little bit what you're talking about. Like you see it quicker, and then we do actually develop more of a capacity to not act when we're upset. Because we know that we're wrong, right? We know we're seeing things through a heat haze. We're seeing things unclearly. And if you know that, you're much less likely to do something about those strong feelings. Because that's what it is we've got these strong feelings and we've been taught, well, I need to do something about those because they're strong. Well, no, you don't. In fact, you're probably much better off waiting till you see things a little bit more clearly. And if you know that the nature of mind is clarity, and it will come if you wait long enough, then that's your best bet. Now, there are instances where people need to, take actions quickly and make decisions quickly, even when they're caught up in upset, and then you just do the best you can, right? It's not all perfect scenarios, but it is. We do develop that capacity more and more. The more that we see the truth of this, that you know what, I don't need to do something about that. At least not right now. And I kind of know, you know what, this will make more sense to me in a minute, or in 10 minutes, or in an hour, or a day. And so I think I agree with you. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
But that's one of those places where it's about how long does it take. Bringing it back to forgiveness, some people can not forgive for years. They'll hold that thinking. They'll wear the gun, in certain situations for a long, long time. And so having a better understanding of this, having that insight that both of these guys have talked about in their feedback, having those insights means you can put the gun down. The gun's no longer relevant, and that's a huge change for people. That's a huge change.
Yeah, and then I think you actually started with this, is when, or maybe you talked about it in what Em said, but when you're not wearing the armor, when you're not buckling up the gun, we get to connect with people on a much deeper level. We get to, because we don't have our guard up. We've gone. A lot of us have gone through life, and we felt like we've been dashed on the rocks. We've been broken a bit, and we've learned that, well, if I don't want to be broken more, if I don't want to be dashed more, then I better be on my guard. I better be on my guard. And once you begin to see that you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Your wisdom will guide you. And on a deeper level, there's a part of you that was never hurt or broken in the first place. And it just creates the opportunity to have a much more wonderful experience of life, a much deeper connections with other people, because on a pretty basic level, we're afraid of being hurt. We don't want to be hurt.
But there's a really interesting one. So you had a bit of feedback, a question that came into you about what happens if somebody's died, that was involved in the situation that you believe requires forgiveness.
Right.
And I thought that was really, an interesting one, because who's suffering? There's a Sid Barnes thing about where he talks about, all those stories that you hold to be true and relate to you and who you are. Well, they're just stories. They don't apply in this moment now, but you keep bringing them into the now.
Yeah.
Keep taking them with you.
It's almost like those are the bullets in the gun. It's like, oh, my past, my memories, all this. I think you might have mentioned last time, these constructs that I've built about the world and about what should and shouldn't be and what's right and what's wrong. If we if we can just see through those a little bit more, just like, oh yeah, that's just thought too. That's not quite as real as I once thought it was. It allows us to see things fresh, to open up to that new thought, to that insight, to forgiveness. Because for me, that's really all forgiveness is
Insight.
yeah, insight. Insight. And by the way, it's insight for me into the truth of the human experience. It's not insight into like cooking or or, kung fu. It's insight into the human experience. What's true about me? What's true about us? All of us. And for me, that's the difference that makes the difference.
And what underpins what you're saying, as somebody I was having a conversation with this week was saying, he was almost making out like insights are the how-tos. They are the doing related with the principles. Like you just have you've got to have the insight, and then you're so like, can I have the insight, please? And I can remember trying that. Like, I'm ready for the insight now. Bring it. And of course, it doesn't happen. So, as you were saying, this is like a human experience, and insights come when insights come. And insights changed your world. Your whole perception of the world can be different once you see it differently. And so forgiveness, if you're willing to hold on to that story. So my how-to is probably more about letting go, because the sooner that you're able to let some of that stuff, let that thought storm pass. Because the only thing I seem to do is struggle with it. A situation that I think, I'll even struggle with, like I'm in a thought storm, I want to get out of the thought storm. Can I do that any faster? And it isn't even like that. It's just like it takes as long to pass as it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, do the clouds need your permission to pass? Do they need you to let go of them to pass? No.
But one of the situations where I talked about on Monday with a guy that I worked with, and I still haven't forgiven him. Now, I know now that it's nothing to do with him, and I know that that forgiveness is possible. I just haven't done it yet, and that's where I am.
And I just want to add to that. You said I see now that it was nothing to do with him, and I think the thought that just came to my head was, well, then I guess all forgiveness is self-forgiveness. If it's never really to do with the other person, if it's only really ever us holding on, ruminating on those thoughts, believing them to be true, acting on them, then it's really only us. So yeah, that just kind of popped into my head.
No, I think that's, if you want to do some more, but I think that could be a perfect point to kind of wrap up with, because what you're saying there is, it's an inside-out reality. It's an inside job. Nobody ever creates your reality for you. You always do it.
Yeah. It's happening inside us, or within our minds. Maybe is another way to say it. But yeah, I think that's a great place to call it.
Perfect. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you again, Tyler. I've loved it. And how do people get in touch with you if they'd like to connect with you and talk some more?
If you want to learn more about me and my work and find some cool resources, check me out on my website, www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And all my contact information is on there. If you want to reach out to me personally, then I'd be happy to hear from you.
Terrific. And some nice articles and some videos and stuff too. So, yeah, enjoy all that. And then because we've done this thing this week, a couple of weeks' time, 23rd of September, I think it is, we're going to do another one, but not with Tyler, with a lady called Becky Adams, who some of you might know because she does stuff recently with weight loss. But I was talking to her about doing something similar to what we Tyler and me have just done here, and it basically came to the subject is, and this is a lovely alliteration. We're going to move from forgiveness to free will.
Ooh, I like it.
So we're going to have a Monday and a Thursday. Monday we'll be talking about free will. Thursday we'll be talking about your stuff. And by the way, I loved your insights and your input and your questions relating to forgiveness. And I hope that you've enjoyed Tyler and myself discussing it. And a bunch of people are going to watch this thing and see something different from it.
Thanks for having me on, Julian. I really have enjoyed working with you too. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Well, I'm sure it won't be the last time, Tyler. I don't know how the hell it's going to happen next, but there'll be something.
That's right. I agree.
All right. Take it easy.